Israel has become known as a startup nation. We know there's a book of that name. There are other books about it. And the main question that's asked is, what's the secret? Well, the truth is, sometimes there's no secret. Or even if there is, it doesn't really help me to know what that secret is. I just have to get on with the job. Of course, it helps to have support from within governmental and business community, from within here. I also need investor interest from overseas. We could, of course, have a session which will show interesting data as to how many companies there are invested. And while this is interesting, it doesn't actually show anyone how to succeed. It doesn't even give you the questions you need to ask. So the purpose of this mini-series is actually to shed light on the how. How can an entrepreneur who plans on success, and how can companies and people who want to invest in such success, well, how do they go about it? So I've said what these seminars are about. They're going to give tools or views from both sides of the table, that of the entrepreneur on the one hand this week, and in 2 weeks' time from the side of the potential investor looking in. And of course, I'm sure everyone is familiar with the line in the song, things that you see from there, you don't see from here. Or maybe it's the other way around. But regardless, they're not redundant, and there is a value into looking in from both sides of the table. So we'll be starting on with a talk in just a moment from Dr. Bat-Ami Gotliv on the long-term business and IP challenges faced by every startup company. Bat-Ami is an Israeli patent attorney specializing in the crafting and execution of IP strategies for her clients. At her current role in Lapidot, Melchior, and Abramovich, Bat-Ami serves as the IP manager of various startup companies.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Jeremy, and I'm really happy to be part of this webinar. I thought it will be really nice to open the session with this picture. I think this picture demonstrates what is being an entrepreneur, what is being a part of a startup. Since when you are an entrepreneur or part of a startup means that you have a vision. In this vision, you see your product, you see your technology, you basically see how you're going to change the world or simply have major impact on society. You imagine your success, you know that you are going to work very hard for such success. And what I'm going to do in this session is to give you a taste for a very powerful tool that will help you to design actually the road for success. And this tool is intellectual property, or how it's called IP. IP is actually a set of legal rules that will legislate in order to encourage innovation and motivate research and development for achieving technology progress. However, you can achieve a lot of benefit out of this tool if you are going to align it with your business plans. Once you align it with your business plan, actually you are going to make the difference between a good startup and successful startup. And what it can be, what is given you. First of all, it will enable you to block your competitors and to establish in that way their market advantage. It will force you to design your company future and to define your roadmap. If you will going to do a patent search, you are going to identify the obstacles. You are not the only one that is using intellectual property. You need to find out what is the barrier that were put in there by others. I think the most important thing here is it will enable you to outflank competitor, to exploit the future and the new market opportunity. In one of my roles, I'm supporting the land of venture companies. Those companies are part of Benny Landa Venture Capital. Benny Landa is the head of Landa Group. He started his way back then when he was the founder of Indigo Digital Printing. Indigo Digital Printing was a small Israeli company that made an history in 2002 when it was sold to HP for $380 million. And the major key factor that was driven this deal were patents. Indigo effectively utilized blocking patents in early stage of R&D and actually forced the big company to think seriously about this small Israeli company, which eventually led to the sale of Indigo to HP. And here you have a citation out of Benny, a vision that patents are like minefields. You need to know how to use it. But first of all, if you would like to be entitled for a patent, you need to obey certain rules. One of the leading rules in patent world is first to file, which means you need to file your patent application before your competitors. However, you need also to file your patent application before any public disclosure of your own. Meaning before you demonstrate your invention, before you demonstrate it in exhibition, in YouTube, or even if before you are providing a prototype of your product for a potential customer. Another thing that you will need to prove for the patent examiner that your innovation has novelty, is new, and contain also inventive step, which means it was not obvious to someone in the field, it was not obvious to someone skilled in the art. And again, this is true for your own invention. So if, for example, you are going to have a patent for certain product, and you are going to improve certain elements in this product, you probably will not be entitled for a second patent for this improvement, because such improvement can consider as obvious development, and you will not have a patent because of an inventive step. All of this together means that you need to think about patents in very early stage of your development, much before you have a mature product. And in fact, I can see this as a real opportunity for you, because it's forced you to look into the future. It's forced you to design your own crystal ball and to think, what is my core technology? What is my core product? And protect it. And more than that, it forces you to think about the future element of your technology. It forces you to think broadly and look into the future business plans. For example, to anticipate shift in technology or marketing demand. You need to imagine what will be the end of your product, technology, startup. Who are you going to sell it for? Who are your potential partnership? If you're going to have a patent and maybe to license the patents, you need to think about the license relationship. But I think the most important message here that you need to keep in mind and to get into the mind your potential competitors. You need to realize that in a certain point of time, usually 18 months after your first priority date, your patent will be published, which means your competitor will see what is your technology, what are you focused about, and immediately will send their experienced R&D to the lab bench to bypass your patent, to design around it. You need to be there before them. You need to think about the possibility for design around when you draft the patent before it's published, before your competitors know about that. We all know that being a startup means living in a competitive and dynamic environment. And also, in this case, patent can help you to manage in such kind of word, you cannot afford yourself to have only 1 or 2 patents. You need to enlarge your patent portfolio together with your business. You need to let your patent portfolio grow with your business. But don't make a mistake here. We are not necessarily talking about the amount of patent. We're also talking about the patent quality. Not so long ago, during investment round and IP due diligence, the typical question that was asked is, how many patents does your company have? Today, I can promise you that investors become much more sophisticated. It's no longer simply about the patent quantity, it's about the quality. And what is a strong patent? A strong patent is a patent that you will use to protect your core business. When I meet in startup as part of my role, sometimes they think about patents as a way to get a reward for their technology. However, if they will focus on technology aspect only, they will leave room for the creative engineer in the competent companies to design around it. If you will use the technical details to support the concept, then you will have a broader and strong patent that will be dedicated to the concept. I think the best example here can be taken from Apple. The way to unlock a cell phone by face recognition. Now, Apple realized that in order to avoid arbitrary unlock of your cell phone, there should be some kind of movement associated with this face recognition. Otherwise, the phone can simply open when it's put in on the side on your table. So they could have a patent on the algorithm that is associated with this movement, or a sensor that detects this movement. In both cases, smart engineer in other companies can find another solution. Instead, they patent and get a patent the concept of capturing the facial image only after the phone is moved. And this is, you must agree with me that this is a very powerful patent. I also would like you to think about the enforcement. At the end, you would like to enforce your patent. You would like to detect the potential infringer. You would like to know or to put your hand on the infringer product. And you will need to go to court and sue the potential infringer and to prove to court that there was some kind of effect on your monopoly that you achieved by a patent. What I would like you to think is, what is your product fingerprint? How can you distinguish your product from others? What is the uniqueness of your product? Once you find it, this is your strong patent. This is something that is worth going through the whole process of patent drafting and patent prosecution until granted. This is a very powerful patent. I think another very important question, maybe the most important one that you need to ask yourself, who is the potential infringer? And maybe the way to demonstrate it is by describing a consumable product, which is part of a technology or a machine. You can predict that consumable products can be easily imitated because they are very cheap, usually. And even if you have a patent on the consumable product as it is, it will be very hard for you to enforce this patent because you are going to face a lot of potential infringer. However, if you will claim for this consumable product as part of your technology or as part of your machine, then your infringement suit will be much more focused. It will be much more realistic. The potential infringer in this case will be someone that will use the machine, or someone who will be trying to mimic, to imitate your machine. But the limitation here are much more stronger, and you will end up with fewer infringement and more possibility for enforcement, together with a consumable product, which is part of it. So I only have 15 minutes here, and I hope I bring the message, the value of the intellectual property. You can earn this value only if you will adopt a business-driven approach for patenting. You must involve your R&D and business development unit in this approach. And if you will do so, patents may become one of the most effective and sometimes even the sole means for creating proprietary defensible market advantage. And I hope that you will not only imagine the road for your success, but you will actually design it by using IP strategy. So here you have my email address, and I will be very happy to answer any question that you might have after this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Batami. So as we can already see, there's a very heavy emphasis on IP rights when it comes to startup success. As with anything else, boundaries are very important. And this is what IP does. It sets boundaries for your competitors so as to provide a safe working space for you. And this in turn provides value to your investors. It's therefore important to ask, what can we do to make our patent portfolio ready for potential investors? What will they be looking for? And this is something that Mike and Avraham will address in just a moment. Mike, Dr. Mike Hammer, is a US patent attorney, the partner at JMB, and he heads up our US practice section. He specializes in obtaining IP rights for clients in the biotech sphere. Avraham Hermon is US patent agent and also a partner at JMB. He's also an Israel patent attorney. He has extensive experience in pharmaceuticals and IP for medical cannabis, and he's filled a variety of roles in the pharma industry in Israel. Gentlemen, take it away.
Thanks, Jeremy. So let me get my screen sharing here. All right. Thank you all for coming this morning. I'm going to start off and Avraham will take over a little bit later on. My name is Mike Hammer. And again, welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. Thank you, Batami, for your first presentation. What's amazing is that we'll see as we go along that there are going to be echoes between what you said and what we're going to be talking about now, both in what we're going to say, but also in some of the imagery. So it's pretty amazing. We prepared these separately, but you'll see that patent attorneys, we think alike. So we're going to be speaking today about making your patent portfolio investor ready. And I would almost put in parentheses from the beginning. This is not an activity which you should be thinking about doing once somebody comes knocking on your door and saying, hey, I heard about your technology, I saw your presentation, and I'm interested in speaking to you. Your portfolio, your patents are something which you should be thinking about from day one, and the way that those patents reflect what you're doing should be in the plans from day one. Another way of saying this is, how do you create an intentional IP portfolio? And there's that road. Another way of saying that is, actually, how can we even be mindful? It's a mindfulness exercise about our technology. be mindful about our technology and the way the technology and the business interact with each other. Because don't forget, like Naomi said, patents are a tool. I've heard sometimes people say, well, I just want to get this patent or I want to get this other patent. Patents aren't a trophy, not a prize. It's a tool. It's a tool as a way to leverage your technology and to provide your company with certain legal rights, as Naomi said, to then further your business goals. And Avraham and I are going to speak about several issues which you should be thinking about and you can use as a way of creating this intentional IP portfolio from the beginning. It's in the planning and the prioritization, keeping your eye on the product, thinking about the prior art and the patentability of your claims that you might be able to get on a certain technology. Don't forget about the patent term, which is the amount of time that you're going to have those exclusive rights. Together, when you leverage these things, your patent portfolio should be something which is a reflective of the present day of your technology, but also the future. And so that's actually what I think that this image here is showing, where you are and where you're going. And then the patents are partially a tool of how you're going to get there. So let's talk a little bit about planning from the beginning. From the beginning of the day, think that you have to think about, well, what's the goal of the IP? Like I said, patents are a tool. So how are you going to use it? What do you want to use it for? Are you using your IP as a way to, are you going to be licensing your IP to somebody else to use? Do you want to be keeping your IP so that it's going to be something which you can use to then enforce against somebody else who might be infringing on a product which you're going to make? And it boils down to the questions of, well, who are you? What's your company? What are the goals of your company? And again, what types of property rights are you going to need in order to further those goals? The next thing, and all importantly in patents, is don't forget it's all about the claims. That's the beginning and the end of your patent right. The property right is defined in the claims in your patent. So you need to be thinking about, well, what should I be claiming? If I've developed a new chemical entity, you should be claiming the chemical entity. If I've developed a new treatment for a disease, you need to be claiming that method of treatment or a composition for use in treating that method. But another way of looking at this is, well, what are investors going to be thinking about? What are they going to be looking for? When they look at my patents, are they going to be looking for particular types of claims? Now here we get into an interesting territory because sometimes what an investor is going to be looking for doesn't exactly jive with the reality of what you can actually get. What can you claim? And Exhibit A of all of this are some of the subject matter eligibility problems in the United States. You may not be aware of this, but there are certain types of patent protection that you can get in the United States depending upon the subject matter. Right now, not 10 years ago, but right now, it's basically impossible to get a claim to a method of medical diagnosis. Full stop. There may be aspects of that you can get, there may be angles of it that you can get, but you're not going to be able to get it. So that if your investor is looking at your company and saying, oh, where's your method of diagnosis? Looks like you can get that in Europe, looks like you can get that claim in Israel. You're not going to be able to get that into the United States, in the United States. And so built into the way you're working on your patent applications, your patent attorneys working on your patent applications, is there another way of claiming that property? Just one example. Another example, and Naomi also spoke about this, is, well, your IP portfolio should be growing over time, but how? There are lots of different models for this, but is your IP, or the types of claims that you can claim over time, is it like a tree with many branches that are coming off of that tree? You have a main technology, and then your further technology is going to be building upon that, and branching off and branching off and branching off. Or are you working in a single field, And your IP portfolio are lots of different plants that are in that same field. The type of company who you are and the type of goals for your company that you might set for yourself from the beginning will in part dictate of the type of IP portfolio you want to design for yourself. We've got to prioritize. So let's talk about money for a second, because there's never enough of it. Everybody wants more, there's never enough of it. And I guarantee you that as much as I value my services, and I hope that my clients value my services, they would probably rather be spending their money on other things than just acquiring IP. Everything from experiments to personnel to anything, you name it. So your IP budget's going to be limited. Because of that, you need to be very mindful of, well, what are your patent filings going to look like? What's the timing going to be? What's the content going to be? And very importantly, what jurisdictions, what countries are you going to be filing your patent applications in? Certain investors are going to be very interested specifically in this question. Because if you have an investor who's based, say, in China, they're going to want to file, you're going to want to have patent applications that are filed in China. If you have an investor or you want to target investors in parts of Eastern Europe, you're going to want to make sure that you have patent applications that are in those countries as well. So although we often talk, and our clients often talk about the main markets, the US and Europe, China, Japan, this is something that you need to be mindful of. One of the timing aspects of this is, well, are you ready to file a particular patent application? And a joining question to this is the technology ready? There are certain technologies where you need to have experimental basis in order to enable the claims, to pass a certain standard so that the examiner can be assured that you're doing what you say you're doing. If you have for example, if you have a treatment for a certain disease, you need to show, even in a test tube, that whatever compound you're using or whatever molecule or composition you're using can do what you say it does. Just having it in writing is not going to be enough. If you don't have those experiments done, if your cake isn't cooked well enough, so to speak, I don't think that a piece of technology is ready to file a patent application. The other aspect of this, are you ready to file? Is your company ready to file? And this speaks to the timing issue, because once you start, the process has a very strict calendar. You have your first patent application. Once you file it, you've got 12 months until for you to be able to claim priority to that patent application. And if you file an international patent application, you have 30 months from that first filing in order to go into different national jurisdictions. Your company needs to be ready for those type of expenditures. So from day one, you have to be projecting 2.5 years from now, am I going to have the money to file patent applications in the places where I'm going to need to file patent applications in? And if I don't, maybe it's worth delaying my filings a little bit. So that's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is, well, what legal rights do you need at any given time? And let's go back to the claims. If you have a technology that can be used in different applications, and you have a claim set that addresses both of these applications, but you may have one investor who is interested in one of these applications, you have a different investor who may be interested in the second application, who trumps it? Who trumps who? Right? Which legal rights do you need at that given time? It may be very worth splitting those two applications into two different patent applications, obtaining those patent claims, and that way you have the claims ready for each of those investors to license separately. That's just one example of that. The other question is, well, when do you need those legal rights? And this speaks to the issue of acceleration of examination. There are different legal schemes around the world that allow you to speed up patent examination, and so you can get your rights faster. Some of these are based on the subject matter that you're claiming. For example, in the United States, cancer immunotherapy, you can be accelerated for. And in the world that we're in right now, anything which is coronavirus related in the United States can also be accelerated, for example. Some of them are not free. Some of them cost money. And those types of expenses, in order to accelerate and get those rights early, may also be something which you're going to want to prioritize and figure into the mix. So I'm going to turn this over to Avraham, who is now going to continue on.
Thanks, Mike. As we heard up until now, patents can be an expensive process. So prioritizing is really important. Our time costs money, and your portfolio depends on how much investment of time a patent attorney is going to be investing in it. So I think that's an important point. One thing to keep in mind is to focus on the product, as Batami has mentioned. And in terms of startups, one of the words that we hear a lot is pivoting. And the startup might start with one idea and then realize that the product that it wants to bring to the market is something a little bit different and pivots. So what's important to keep in mind is that as the product changes, the IP also changes. It could be that the initial filing of a startup was on a certain element or certain aspect of the product of the invention, and it could be no longer relevant or less relevant. So what I recommend to do to overcome this is to make sure that patent attorneys are involved in a lot of stages of development. It's not something where you can just put your patent application in an envelope, put the stamp on it, press the send button, and you're set. That's not the way it works. Constantly being in touch with the patent attorney, understanding where the product is going, and making sure that the patent situation, the patent portfolio matches the product, the evolving product. That also connects to being aware of the rights that exist, being aware of what the patent claims, what the patent can claim, and it's really a two-way street. The development has to match the IP. It could be you get to a certain point where you realize, hey, we're not going to get this sort of patent that we intended to begin with. What we should do is change our focus in R&D as well to fit the potential protection that we're going to have. That's the sort of vision that someone has to have when developing IP. What rights will be needed in terms of, what's your next step in terms of development? Are you going to partner with an investor? What is the investor looking for? What types of patents? What's the standard based on the type of product? If someone is developing a new use of, for example, a known pharmaceutical compound, the investor can't expect to have a product protection on it, but the investor can have potentially a use patent or a pharmaceutical composition type patent. So what are the investors' demands? What are their standards here in this sort of situation? And based on that, plan the portfolio accordingly. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Prior art. Now, there is an approach that some startups take that I know what's out there. There's no one that has a product like mine. And that's important for us as patent attorneys to get that input, but I think that's only looking at part of the picture. Why? Because shortly after filing a patent application, an examiner will look at this patent application. Shortly, maybe 3 years, maybe 4 years, but maybe also 3 months, depending on the strategy. But my general advice to patentees is you may not necessarily know exactly what's out there because you're looking at products that are out there. And what we're looking at as patent attorneys when we do searches is what will an examiner pull up? We use the same databases that the examiners look to do searches. And what will the examiner pull up to cite against your patent application? So with that vision, we'll be able to not only tell you if something is patentable or not, but be able to draft your patent application in a way that's more exact. If we can relate to what's known, then we can focus the examiner on the claims that we believe are patentable and support those more, maybe even show advantages vis-a-vis what's known. A lot of times I've seen investors looking at potential projects that are in early stages that there's no patent granted. So what will be helpful for you as a startup is to say, we have this search, we know about this prior art, rather than trying to hide it, we know about it, and this is how we attempt to deal with it, and this is how we're going to deal with it once it comes up in the examination. I think that's a more impressive show that you could show to the investors, rather than saying, this is our project, we don't really know about the prior art. So we can't bury our heads in the sand. We have to understand that the prior art will turn up eventually. If we don't find it, the examiners don't find it, and sometimes if the examiners don't find it, then our potential opponents in court will find it, those trying to invalidate our patent based on prior art. Another question that comes up is, what sort of opinion do you want from your attorney? And FTO, or freedom to operate, has become a sort of a buzzword that people throw around, sometimes not necessarily knowing what it means. And what it means is an FTO opinion, a freedom to operate opinion, is something that an attorney will look at the product and will be able to compare the product to other claims of other companies that are out there and determine, hey, your product is okay, you're not going to be sued for infringement of this patent that's out there. So that's something that is important to do at a certain stage, but what might be even more important is to show a clear path to patentability. In other words, if there is a patent that's out there, then one approach could be, okay, someone is potentially blocking me, I can get license to that patent. However, when it comes to patentability, if there's an article or a prior patent that's before mine that describes my invention, I can't really do anything about it. I can't go pay off someone to hide it. It's there, it's out in the public domain. I can't get license to it, nothing is gonna help. So in a sense, showing a clear path to patentability is more important than having an FTO or freedom to operate opinion. And here we're at the last slide is patent term. One of the things that the investor is going to be looking at when looking at the portfolio is saying, okay, very nice, you have a patent, but when does it expire? And when are you going to be on the market? So making this calculation is, okay, we have X years of patent term. Is that enough to return our investment? Because assuming we can make Y dollars a year over X years, is it worthwhile? And it's a fairly simple estimation that we could do. So I've seen way too many projects that have been scientifically very interesting, but they develop too slowly. And they come to a point where the patent is 10 years old and they're at very early stages in development of the product. And you have to come to a realization that it's not so realistic to have this patent, although it's been granted in a lot of different countries, you've paid a lot of money to get it, it's not so realistic that this is going to give an adequate life to the protection of the product. So that's something that is important to keep in mind, and that's why, going back to Mike's slides, is that there are follow-on patents. You want to make sure that you're developing the portfolio as well. Obviously, in general, your older patents are going to be broader and stronger and more important, but at the same time, it's important to keep in mind newer patents on more specific elements of the developments. Some products are eligible for patent term extension, such as pharmaceuticals, where there is a sort of an exchange that's done, a calculation that's done by the regulatory authorities that determine that this product has been in development for a certain number of years, and that's been sort of eating away from the patent life, so we can return that. That's something that is important to calculate, and investors are going to want to know about it as well. And then also, what's the plan after the patent expires? How are you going to deal with competition? Is there a certain know-how that you have that you're potentially keeping as a trade secret that will make other competitors make it hard for them to develop your product. These are all things to keep in mind, and understanding that a patent term is limited to essentially 20 years. Okay, so thanks a lot for listening. I'm happy that people joined with us today, and our email addresses are here, so feel free to reach out either through the chat. I see that some people have been commenting on the chat, and we're going to address those questions, and or optionally by email.
Okay, thank you, Avraham and Mike. I'd just like to pick up on a couple of points that were mentioned there. As I think Mike and Avraham know, you just have to mention the word China in order to get my blood pressure rising. And it's not because of what the Chinese do. It's actually because of what everybody thinks they do, or maybe they used to do at one time. And there are all these stories that people have, which are actually outdated, as to how the Chinese use IP rights. And the truth is that the Chinese have become, over the past number of years, very, very conscious. And in fact, sometimes people say, well, I'm not going to deal with China, so I don't need rights there. That's a mistake. The Chinese are not only IP conscious, but they are conscious to the extent that if there is a gap, including in a gap in China, they will take advantage of it. They'll take advantage in other places in the world as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a little bit like one of the classic stories is someone saying, well, I put up my new technology on a crowdfunding site. When I get enough money, I'll go and patent it. Well, first of all, they've just destroyed novelties, I'm sure we all know. But then when they find that someone else has taken it and they've actually claimed it as their own, or they've just started copying it, then they get really upset. And well, my analogy is, well, if you leave a 200 shekel bill in the middle of the road and you come back a week later and someone's taken it, well, you just say, well, I was being foolish. So that's an analogy there. But again, I could talk for hours in China, but I promise you I won't. The other thing, picking up on what Avraham said about prior art and the way that you detail your invention. When we draft an application, when we describe our invention and describe different embodiments and different details, different examples, we can only do that for the first time on the date of filing once. After that, we're unable to add anything substantive, anything important. And the question is, we can either do this blind by not knowing what the prior art says and just say whatever we want to say because we figure that it's good, and whatever we feel is less important put in. Or alternatively, we can take off the blindfold, do a good search, maybe realize that we have a problem because there's something which is too close for comfort, but then that actually really gives us a very, very good direction, a positive guide as to what we need to do in order to get a patent which will have enough meat on it to overcome the prior art. And remember, the prior art is not something, it may only be discovered in a search that's done, a year or 2 or 3 years from now by the examiner, but he can only look at the same prior art that we can find now. So that is very, very important to do, a good point to reinforce. So changing tack a little bit, we know that one of the most important contributors to the commercialization of cutting edge technologies in Israel are the tech transfer offices, the TTOís. And among them, BGN of Ben Gurion University is certainly one of the leading players. Just a word about Ben Gurion University. I think it's true to say that over the past 20 years, and even more so, 15 years, 10 years, it has grown in stature. And in fact, the thing that I hear about it, I would say more than anything else, is that when students are considering where to go, they always want to go to Ben Gurion University because it's a fun place. And of course, it has to have the correct standards as well. But to learn somewhere, to study somewhere which is also fun as well as being on a very high standard and a great place to be at, well, there's nothing that can really beat that. So the next presentation is going to be by Dr. Naomi Ziv. She's a patent attorney with a PhD in bioinformatics and chemistry. For the last 8 years, she's been at BGN. In 2012, she started as the Director of Intellectual Property. And since 2017, she has been serving as a VP of Intellectual Property. So Naomi, please, the field is yours.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Okay, so good morning, and thank you all for joining us this morning. I'll be talking about this, how can we work on this gap from an initial early stage invention at the lab towards a patent that can be strong enough to be attractive to the industry and shorten the way to production. Basically, we're talking here about an interface between two different systems, academia and industry. In academia, the basic idea is to share the knowledge, exchange ideas, and publish. And in industry, the basic principle is to hold exclusive ownership of a product or process and hopefully keep it secret from our competitors. One strong way to bridge these differences is using patents. Patents filed at the right time with the right breadth can enable the researchers to publish. And on the other hand, when licensed to a company, they can have this ownership, exclusive ownership. Companies are basically directed to a certain industry, fertilizers, pharma, chemicals, cyber. Here in academia, we have so many disciplines and departments, and we are handling a wide variety of inventions from different disciplines, as well as interdisciplinary collaborations. And while there's a certain process for publishing at the scientific journals and certain criteria for accepting a scientific paper, in the patent world, there are different underlying principles. For example, the invention must be novel, so that it wasn't published before and was not part of the common knowledge. It should have an inventive step over the prior art to what is known today at the field, and an industrial applicability. So we're aiming here at products or processes or methods and not at hypothesis or general algorithm. We really need something physical in hand. So how do we move from an early stage invention to a commercial enterprise? In corporate R&D, we start with an invention. It is oftentimes part of a whole strategy of this company. Then we perform experiments and additional experiments. Eventually, we have enough data, strong data to file a fully drafted, strong patent application. Now, oftentimes, a provisional patent application is filed at the early stage of the project in order to secure the filing date, which has implications for the novelty and inventive step issues. But the whole year is directed towards improving and ameliorating this provisional patent application and obtaining enough data. In academia, the inventors start with an invention, something that is of interest to them. They perform the experiments, and then they would like to publish it. It can be in journals, in conferences, in the local department, okay, or a project day of the students at the university. So what is important for us is to file a patent application prior to this publication. And thus we often file a provisional patent application based on what we have at the moment. Then we have a whole year to advance this initial publication and to see how we can arrive at a fully drafted, complete patent application that we can later license to existing companies or even establish startup companies based on this invention. And these companies should be capable of developing this invention into a commercial product because it is still an early stage invention. How to make this invention attractive to the industry? Or some basic things that perhaps companies look at are that this patent that we eventually try to license to them is protectable on the patent level and also enforceable. Perhaps the process that is described can be easily copied by a competitor. So we need to see that the process is really unique or has some special features that will help us protect it and enforce against infringers. The invention should be beneficial to society so that companies would be interested in it and would like to promote it. It should have a large enough potential market because the companies will invest a lot in developing it, in producing it, and then marketing it. So it should start with a good point of start. And a profitable, of course, invention. So how do we actually, in practice, move from this early stage invention to a stronger patent application? It's important to file a provisional patent application before publication. Sometimes it's the other way around. The inventors already published, and then we are limited in our further possibilities. Once we file this provisional patent application, we have a year to plan ahead, which experiments we would like to perform. For example, supporting experiments or comparative examples showing that this invention has advantages over what is known today. And also think of various implementations of these inventions. How to really turn them into a product or a process that can be commercializable. Another important strategy is to consult other in the fields, for example, patent attorneys or even the companies, see what is the market need, what are the market needs, and consult colleagues in other fields, perhaps the researcher in the next building or another department who may have certain ideas or point of views that can enlarge what you can initially started with. So when consulting a patent attorney, why this is important? Because patent attorneys have the point of view that can help us proceed from basic science to a real technology. They can help us plan the year ahead, direct to the right example, suggest which kind of results will be needed. They're not telling the inventors what to do, but they're suggesting, they're giving some hints and point of views, and hopefully our researchers will pick this up and try to add these experiments to their plan, so that by the end of the year, we have this data. A patent attorney can also help us with thorough literature search to really see where we stand on the grounds of novelty and non-obviousness. When planning ahead, internally, we can think, suggest to the inventors or look about the market focus. For example, if a researcher is working on tuberculosis, while there's a larger market for influenza, perhaps add another experiment or demonstration that can show that your technique can also work for influenza. It could be helpful for companies who are then looking at this technology. Choose the right examples that can help us patent-wise, in addition to the scientific interest. Move from general to practical. Sometimes our researchers stop one extra step from an algorithm to a product. So for the provisional patent application, this is what we have, this is the paper, but then try to think how to really turn it, what products can be using this algorithm. Sometimes it's worthwhile thinking how to turn the process into a product. for example, a diagnostic kit or software. So maybe we have a process that will not lead to a strong patent. It is easily infringed, but by turning this process into a product, adding another feature to our invention, we make the patent stronger. Also think about several possible applications beyond the area of expertise. The researchers are very experts on their field. They know what's going on, but sometimes if you think outside of the box and you take this invention and you brainstorm, you can think of additional applications of this product or molecule or algorithm. For the biological fields, it can help if you also add examples using grass materials, generally regarded as safe, so it can hasten up and help further regulatory stages at a later step. Think about toxicity, like using the right solvents. Perhaps your molecule dissolves well in an organic solvent which cannot be used for human beings. So try to think at another example or search other solvents that could be, this could be a great example that can help us later in commercializing this patent. Choose the right models. Sometimes additional pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics experiments can be added, perhaps with another colleague from the pharmacy department. This could also help and broaden this patent. Also solubility, stability. Think beyond what the mere example that is scientific important, also to other applications. And hopefully all this will result in a patent application that has broad enough claims based on enough examples, the right examples of attractive applications to the industry, and lead to a product and process that are relevant to the market and are enforceable. Lastly, it's a great help if the inventors are open-minded, cooperative, and motivated towards commercialization, and thus all this work on the patenting level is much more easier, and of course in commercializing it. So to summarize, in order to be patent and commercially oriented, we first need to be careful not to disclose this invention prior to filing first patent application. Consult a patent attorney about how to strengthen this initial invention, early stage invention. Think of which results are needed, plan experiments with the patenting in mind. Do a literature and patent search. Think of possible collaborations with colleagues. Contact with companies and industry is great. It can be very helpful. Sometimes they approach our inventors, sometimes we approach them, but please sign first a non-disclosure agreement or disclose only general ideas and not the details. And always keep your enthusiasm. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to hear your questions at the end of this session.
Thank you very much, Naomi. Before we carry on, I'd just like to call out, even though almost everyone here is local, we do have a couple of visitors from overseas, from Poland and from the US, and thank you for joining us. Naomi, one of the things you mentioned was planning ahead, but being flexible, because there are going to be changes that we don't even know about. That's of course the extreme end of these of being flexible, and I think Avraham had at least one case during the past number of months where a client with an existing technology said, "Oh, I can use my technology with regard to COVID." So and
right.
If I'm not mistaken, you even then filed a petition for accelerated examination in the Israel Patent Office and got very good results very quickly. So
yes,
that's why it's good to talk to your patent attorney, because sometimes they see things that you may not necessarily see.
Exactly.
So, definitely. So we're on to the last presentation. last but certainly not least, it all comes down to money. We can plan and plan and plan, but things do cost money in the real world. And we know that a large source of funding available for Israeli industry in general, but particularly for early stage companies, is provided through the Israel Innovation Authority. The good thing about government funding is that unlike a private investor, the government does not wish to take control of your company, certainly doesn't wish to take ownership. They're interested in developing the economy, and your company, your startup company, your project is one small part of that. But again, you get a lot of small parts. It goes to empower the whole. The problem, however, is when a private investor comes in, and this can be especially the case from overseas, when he wishes to take the technology and the company with it overseas. Success is fine, but if the Israeli economy isn't going to benefit from money that's been invested by the Israeli taxpayer, well, you can see where there might be some problems. And that's one reason, and I'm not sure, and Hillel, I'm sure is going to help us out with this, I'm not sure how true it is, how real it is. That's one reason why some companies would rather not take money from the Innovation Authority. Now, just a word about Hillel. He's the head of IP of the authority. His responsibilities include the evaluation and granting, hopefully granting, of requests for special authorizations for the transfer of production know-how during acquisitions of and investments in companies who receive grants from the Israeli Innovation Authority. So I will not try and say what I just said again. I don't think I'm capable of doing that. So Hillel, please take it away.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm going to give a short overview of the IAA. I'm going to talk a little bit about our history, our purposes, different tools that we have for helping companies, different principles, policies, and some basic information about the obligations that Jeremy mentioned that are entailed when receiving funding. And I'm going to end with a few patent-specific information about when you receive grants. The IAA has been around for over 40 years. We were originally under the name of the Office of the Chief Scientist. Some of you may know us. We were part of the Ministry of Economy. Our purpose and our charter has been to create incentives to create, for research and development and technological innovation as a vehicle to create economic activity, employment, and overall to give the economy a technological edge over competition. Most of our incentives are done through grants. Jerry mentioned earlier on that 2019 was 1.7 billion shekel of grants. This year, as a result of COVID, the government has upped our budget to 2.2 billion shekel. And I think we're viewed as, in general, throughout the government as a very effective tool for getting the money to the right companies, especially now when they need it. A few short comments about our policy and how we give out grants. We don't want to control the market. We don't want to lead the market. We want to enable. We believe that the companies, the inventors, you guys, you all have a better idea in most cases about what's happening and what needs to be developed and how it should be developed. And we build our grants along those lines. When we judge grants through neutrality, we want to see technological excellence, business potential, and capability of the company. We're matching private money. We're not replacing the private money. The concept of matching also comes in that we're never going to give 100% of the funding. We're only, in most cases, it's up to 50%. In special programs, we'll go up to 85% of the budget. But we're never going to replace money. We don't want to chase out private investors. We want to complement them. Another thing is that what we're doing, the way we give our grants is that we're participating in the risk. We're not diluting the company. We're not diluting the shareholders. They're conditional loans that are paid back only through success. If the company is not successful, then the payments then no payment is reimbursed to the government. Again, it's all royalties from income. I'll talk about this a bit later. Another thing that we're interested to see is we want to see that the money that we're giving, as I said, we're not replacing private money. We want to address market failures. We want to find the funding gaps in the market where there's high risk, where investors aren't going to be there, and that's where the government's job is to fill that gap. In 2015, the Knesset re-legislated our law, and we created the Israel Innovation Authority. We replaced or continued the OCS. And the main reason that we were created is to give more flexibility. It's very hard to work within the government, and we became an independent organization in 2016, and it allows us to have a lot more flexibility to match the dynamic and constantly changing needs of the industry. Again, this is we try to create tools to support every sector at every stage. If you're med tech, fintech, clean tech, whether you're low tech or high tech, we try to be there, and we try to meet to create the appropriate incentives. One of the main things that changed when we created the IAA is we created 6 separate divisions to match the needs of to create toolboxes for different parts of the economy. I'm going to elaborate a little bit on the first 2. I'm going to talk about all 6 of them briefly. The first one is the startup division. This is the very early stages. We're talking about pre-seed, where you can get money through the TNUFA program, which is up to 200,000 shekel for even again pre-seed. If you have an idea and you're still in your garage, you can get grants to get to that next stage, to bring you to that milestone. There are technological incubators, which will give the company the ability to grow from an idea, from that your first taking from technological transfer to grow to a company which will have a fundable milestone. There are innovation labs which will partner you up with larger companies who are trying to get innovation to be involved in their processes. There's the growth division, which will start from early stage companies to growth companies, and even generic R&D, very high risk R&D for larger companies. Those are the main tools that I think are relevant for most. Again, there are different types of grants for every stage of a company. There's the third division is a technological infrastructure. This is a division that deals with applied R&D infrastructure with an emphasis on collaborations between academia and industry. It's one of a lot of the funding through this division goes to academia itself to create technologies which already exist, but to bring them to the TRL to be transferred to an industrial entity. We have an international collaboration department. Again, there's bilateral programs if you have partnerships with companies abroad. We have grants to work within the European Union frameworks, the Horizon 2020, which is almost now over. Different programs for working with collaborations with large MNCs, adapting your products for foreign markets. These are all, again, these are just in a nutshell, all the different possible grants that we have. There's advanced manufacturing, which is purpose is to strengthen the lower tech, to involve technologies in lower tech companies, whether it's, again, low tech companies. And there's a societal challenges, which deals with involving technology in the quality of public service, which is something that we can all appreciate. There's assistive technologies for the disabled. They encourage also different aspects of human capital involving minorities in high tech, whether it's women, special programs for Arabs, for ultra-Orthodox people who are underrepresented in high tech in Israel, and we're trying to involve them. There's also a program for developing technologies for third world countries, which is also a very nice idea. I'm going to just mention that our site has a tool for matching an appropriate benefit track for each client's needs. It's a small simulator. You enter your details, and it'll walk you through a few basic questions, and you'll get to what we believe the most appropriate track for you is. And also contact information for each division and each benefit track can be found on our site. So as I said, there's a lot of money that we give out. A lot of companies, there are thousands of applications each year, thousands of approvals each year. What are the strings attached, and what are the caveats? What are the qualifications here? So one thing I'm going to say in advance is we're here for the Israeli economy, and therefore only Israeli entities or Israeli citizens can apply. If you're a foreign citizen, you can do it through an Israeli entity. You can, but the entity that applies to the IAA is always going to be an Israeli one, and the obligations will be on that entity. So I'm going to talk about 4 main obligations. The first is royalties, manufacturing, ownership of IP, and the fourth one is investments in the company that you have to report. So regarding royalties, most of the benefit tracks have a 3% royalty from related revenue, and the keyword is related revenue. We're not taking all the revenue of the company. The royalties are paid only from revenues that are related to the R&D that was funded. The revenues are paid, as I mentioned beforehand, up to the grant received plus LIBOR interest, which is the lowest interest you'll receive on a available in the market. This is the follows idea of risk participation. If you succeed, then you pay back. If there's no success, then you don't have to pay back the money. I mentioned the LIBOR and the royalties. There's also, with regard to the royalties paid, if you're manufacturing abroad, there are small penalties. One is an increased royalty rate, and I'll mention this in a second. In certain situations, there's an increased cap. Instead of paying the regular amount that you receive, you can pay up to more than you received. I'll elaborate that in a moment. So manufacturing abroad, while the default is we're here for, as I said before, we're here for the Israeli economy. we want you to manufacture in Israel. I'm not going to white paint code it, and that's the default. When you transfer your manufacturing abroad, you need to receive prior approval from the research committee, and it can entail an increased cap up to 300%. It's a function of how much is being transferred abroad. Now there's a very important thing to mention, especially for people who are filling out applications. In each application, there's a part of the application is called the manufacturing declaration. Companies that are allowed to declare during their application how much they intend to manufacture abroad. And if you declared in the application what you're going to manufacture abroad, and your application was received, then there's no penalty on that there's no raised cap. You still pay a slightly increased royalty rate, but there's no increased cap, which is this is a very important information. Many people gloss over it at an earlier stage. It's very important, and I can't emphasize enough the value of properly filling out this part of the application. Now there are pros and cons to doing this. The pro is no increased cap, like I mentioned, and it could save you a lot of money down the line. The downside is that as I said, it's an integral part of the evaluation and the grading of the company, we value companies that are going to manufacture in Israel. It's part of the purpose of creating jobs and having technological spillover to other sectors in the Israeli economy. It's part of the valuation process. If two companies are vying for the same grant, and one of them is going to manufacture in Israel, they're more likely, and everything else being equal, they're going to get the grant as opposed to the other company. So you have to take it into account. And another thing that's important to notice is to fill this out, not what you're going to do tomorrow, not what you're going to do 3 days. You have to plan. And this, because this declaration that you're filling out is going to affect your company 5 years down the line, 10 years down, even 20 years. So you should take into account your mass capacity, not what you're doing this year, not what you're doing next year, not your prior to scale up, your full manufacturing, your biggest dreams. That's what you should be filling out here. Ownership of IP. Now I'm going to use the word IP, but the legal terminology is know-how here, and it's not limited to patents. It's all know-how. And even when patents do not exist or patents have expired, the limitations on know-how or IP still exist. So you should take that into mind. So the first rule about IP is about background IP. The company must have all the background IP that it needs to do the project. If you don't have access to your background IP, then the value of such a project is very little. So we're going to want to see that at least you have an exclusive right to any IP needed from the background. This is a very especially important connection to Naomi's presentation. If you're taking your technologies from academia, you're going to need to show that exclusive license. The second aspect of ownership of IP is that the company must own all the IP and know-how developed as a result of the IIA grants. So while for background we accept exclusive licenses, for the new IP you must own all the IP. Now, two things here is one is the company has to own the IP, not the investor. The investors are above the company. The entity that we're always looking at is going to be the company itself. Now, the ownership of IP is going to be important when you work with subcontractors. You have to show that their products are owned by you. If you're working in open source and you're going to be wanting to give a license to the rights, you need a prior approval. And this also affects how a project can be funded. If you intended to fund in a cost plus model where the ownership is owned by the parent company, that's problematic. The ownership has to be in Israel. Now, that's about the first stage when you're receiving the grants, but the limitations apply throughout the life of the project or through the technology. Any transfer of the IP requires the research committee's approval. When it's in Israel, it's a very formal approval, which the implications of the approval are that the IP is transferred to the new owner. All the obligations to the IIA are transferred to the new owner. When it's the transfers abroad, there's this entails in paying back the grants plus an exit fee. It's usually a one-time payment, and I'm gonna there's a calculation within our legislation which says how much is paid back. The calculation takes into effect the following parameters: the amount you received, the how much R&D expenses you've had, what the price of the IP is, the purchase price, how much royalties have been paid, how much time has passed since the grants were received, and the logic behind. I can go into the math if anyone's interested, but I think it's easier to explain it as logically. What the payback to the government in a case of you transferring the IP out of Israel is you take our part in your R&D expenses, which is the grants divided by your R&D expenses, and you multiply it by the purchase price. So from the purchase price, you're going to pay back to the government our part in the expenses that were spent. So different things to take in mind. Usually over time, that ratio, our part within the company's expenses, is usually diluted. So the longer a company continues, the less the amount will be. Again, it's a function. Every parameter matters. There is a minimum to the function and a maximum to the function, which is very important to take into account. The minimum is always the grants received. There will never, except for a case of bankruptcy through bankruptcy court, any exit, which entails the transfer of IP, you have to pay back at least the grants received plus LIBOR. The maximum amount is in 2012. Jeremy mentioned this earlier that there had been a lot of noise or complaints from VCs that they didn't want to invest in companies that had received IIA grants because they were worried about how much they would have to pay back in case of an exit. And the legislation response is that we capped the amount so that everyone will know you can hedge exactly how much it's going to be in the case of an exit. And that's the worst case scenario is going to be 6 times the grants received. And in the case where the purchaser commits to leaving the activities in Israel for 3 years after the acquisition, then instead 3 times the grants received. Now there is another option for transferring IP out of Israel, and this is very important to what was mentioned before, the different models for how you're going to use your IP. So what I mentioned before was a transfer of IP, or usually a sale for IP, but there's also a model for paying back the grants in a case where you give non-exclusive licenses to your IP. And here according to the nature of a license, that the money is being paid over time. The payments to the IAA are also done over time. It's back-to-back payments to the IAA at the pace at which which you're getting the money. So again, and I'll mention a pro and a con for this. The pro is that there's no one-time fee, and also that the IAA is participating in the risk. If the license is terminated, then no further payments are required. Whatever has been paid, but no further payments are required. And there's a large participation in the risk entailed in the license. But the downside or the con here is that the cap is always going to be 6 times the grants received. So the potential for how much is being paid back is larger, but it's being paid back over time, and there's less risk involved in the company. A few other, I mentioned before, using open source or additional IP topics that you should be aware of is if you need to put your IP in escrow, or if you want to put a lien on your IP, then you need to get approval from the research committee. Oh, and another important thing I mentioned, so we're talking about exits, and it's very important to differentiate between the trigger for the IAA is not the acquisition of a company, it's the transfer of the IP. So if you're in a situation where you have a buyout or an exit, which is only a share purchase, and the only thing that's being changed in the company is the ownership, but the IP will be staying in Israel, and the rights will be staying in Israel, then there's no payment back to the IAA at that time. At that point in time, we still see the economic value as being in Israel, and there's no trigger to paying back the money. What you do need when you have investments in the company, there are two things to take into account. One is when a company takes grants or funding from the IAA, has 2 responsibilities. You're required to report when there's a change in the control in the company, and secondly, when you have a new investor who is a non-Israeli citizen or entity who holds 5% or a legal becomes a balinyan, an interest holder in the company. So that's from 5%. Then the foreign investor has to sign a form, which is it's called an undertaking, but in short, what it's saying is that he understands that there are obligations and limitations regarding the IP and the production and the manufacturing, and he understands that these exist, and he will not purposely break the law or cause the company to break the law or break its obligations. I know this was all in short. If you have any questions, you can either contact me through the chat or through or questions later. I'm going to say a few final things about patents. The IAA supports R&D expenses with regards to patents. These, I have some very good news is that recently until recently it was limited up to 30,000 shekel per project, and it was up to 5 patents within a specific project. And these limitations have been taken away. So there's no specific limit on patent expenses. But things that you should know, and you could, patent attorneys are recognized, but the expenses which are relevant are only expenses up to the registration of the patent. Enforcement, maintenance fees, they're not recognized. Again, this is because of what we're trying to encourage is the R&D, and we're very rarely involved in anything further on in the company, and which we consider more commercial aspects of the company's decisions, which again, we're not involved in. We want to leave the leadership and the choices up to the companies. When a company's patent plans or patentability of their development is an integral part of what your application, and in some situations, the research committee will ask for either an opinion or an FTO, which we mentioned earlier. But again, it's understood that certain fields patents are not just not necessary or detrimental to the development. But again, it's a very important thing about many things that you will be asked to fill out in an application is the research committee wants to know that the company, this was mentioned beforehand, and they want to know that you know where you are, you know who you are, what your plan is, and where you're going to be next year and down the line. And how a company sees their patent plan is definitely part of that. It's part of the evaluation of the evaluation process. I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Hillel. I imagine that what you said we could probably stretch out into several hours of discussion. The bottom line for me would be that if now in that position, I would say, well, the most important thing that I need to know is your phone number.
That's, yeah.
Anyway, so first of all, thank you very much to all the speakers. We have run over time, but as long as people are happy to stay on for a few minutes while we address some of the questions that have come up, then we'll gladly do so, although hopefully fairly briefly. Having said that, if anyone feels, I know a few people have had to leave, if anyone does need to get away, it's fine. No, there you go. But in any case, we hope that to see you again in a couple of weeks. The first question, this is from Irene of Dermaflow. I think this is for Batami. Can you further clarify your example of Apple face recognition IP, so we could potentially use a general concept for other industries if possible?
Yeah, in fact, I'm looking at the patent itself right now, and I can send it to you. And I will only read for you the preamble of the claim, so you will get a feeling what it is about. The preamble is a method for automatically unlocking a mobile device having a camera comprising. So the idea here was to focus on the what's called the final product. I mean, if you will read, the claim is really long, but you will not find in the claim any mentioning of sensors or algorithm. It's all about the method, how the cell phone is going to be unlocked. So I think the message here is to imagine what is your final product, what is the concept that you would like to be there. What will be the best blocker of your competitor. And again, I can send you the patent itself, and it's very interesting to see that.
Okay, I think one of the things that I understand from what you mentioned, Batami, is that you need to think out of the box. Actually, definitely. In connection with Apple, and this is more to do with trademarks and visibility than anything else, one of the most, I would say, important lessons that I received in terms of marketing or branding your own products and giving yourself own free advertising was a number of years ago. I was at a conference. It was in a very large hotel. And there was one of these long, dark corridors with couches all the way along, as hotels have. Again, it was very poorly lit. But the one thing you noticed was the illuminated Apple symbol on the back of almost every single computer of every single attorney that was sitting on almost every single available seat all the way down the corridor. So by the end of walking down that corridor, you had had some amazing advertising without Apple actually being there in any shape or form. Simply by selling their products, they were actually, they were marketing them in a very, very powerful way. So it's thinking out of the box and thinking, in the final analysis, what are the uses going to be and how can we most capture those potentially within our own IP portfolio? Clearly, every field is going to have its own way of interpreting that, and it won't be for everyone. In the same way that, in general, one size does not fit all. It's very common to file, for example, to file provisional applications. Is it something you should always do? No. It's something you might want to do in most cases, quite possibly, but you need to sit down and look at every case as it comes up. Anyway, Bartolome, thank you very much. Sonia from H2 Energy Now. This, I think is for you, Mike, if I remember correctly. When you say grow over time and you're talking about, I presume, the portfolio, are you taking additional filings worldwide on the same patent or additional ways to block your competitors?
Yes. Yes, but and I'll give the horrible lawyerly answer, which is, and it depends. There are lots of ways that a patent portfolio can grow over time. One is that if you're doing R&D and you're constantly doing R&D on a certain technology, there are going to be innovations to the technology which truly are novel and inventive over what you filed before. In those cases, a new patent application is absolutely the right way to go. Another way is that from the get-go, your original filings contain a lot of description and a lot of enabling support for different enablements of your technology, lots of different embodiments of your technology, so that you can then naturally, from a single trunk, as you will, of that patent application, you can have applications which are filed in other countries, and then divisionals from those applications over time as as time goes on and as your priorities change. Of course, the downside to that second model is that your patent term is always going to be pinned to your original filing, so that over time the utility or the value of those follow-on filings will start to decrease as the available patent term decreases. But certainly early in patent term, that's a great way to go.
Thank you, Mike. Sonia, before I'm going to get you to interpret you had a second question. I just wanted to mention that the contact list has been uploaded so of the speakers, so it's on there. And I see Batam in the meantime also uploaded the Apple patent, which I'm sure will be very, very good for any insomniacs here. Anyway, so Sonia, could you explain the question that you asked about searching, please?
Okay. When I started out learning about patents, I have 7 right now. One of the things someone suggested to me was to use patenttest.com or some equivalent service and actually check your idea globally. And then they'll give you a report back. Then you know you have some novelty or uniqueness of it, and it didn't cost you a fortune because you didn't pay a patent attorney yet. But it was a good way to at least start off, or even go to the patent site in the United States and search that way. But you didn't mention any of that, so I was a little confused. Do you suggest if someone has a new idea or we have a new way, that the best thing is just talk to a patent attorney? Or is it better to at least walk into the patent attorney and say, this is what my search came back with?
I guess the question is addressed towards me, so I think, because I mentioned searching, so I think I'll take a stab at it. I'm not familiar with patent test itself, but there are searching companies that focus on searching.
Right.
Some of them involve patent attorneys and some of them do not. And I think that that is an alternative for going to patent attorneys. And I think we have even a representative of one of those companies that we work with here on the call, on the Zoom. In terms of what I recommend, I sometimes there is a disadvantage with certain service providers in that they, once they understand the invention, they can do a search. Then for a lot of clients, their interpretation of the search results isn't sufficient. In other words, a client will sometimes want an answer and say, what are my chances of patentability? And sometimes the search organizations can't give that. I am all for inventors going to public databases and searching on their own as best as they can before shelling out money to patent attorneys or search organizations to do this sort of searching. The reason being that with something like Google Patents, if you know how to search on Google, you'll know how to search on Google Patents, and it will give you pretty good results if you're willing to put in the time and go through, especially in a lot of different fields. I wouldn't say that that's the end of the story, and once you do a Google patent search, you can say, oh, we're clear. I would double check it, but in order to find prior art that's easily available, sometimes Google Patents is even a good place to start. So I hope that answers your question.
Now, when you say prior art, do you mean searching by images, or do you mean just searching for other patents?
Well, prior art is our term that we use for any prior publication.
Okay.
That's just that's our jargon. So whether it's image-based or text-based.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good question.
Yes, yeah. I think just to emphasize a certain point on that, it's important to find out as much as you can. The interpretation, though, is best left, unless it's very, very clear written in plain English. Very often there are nuances there, which is a result of patents being written not in English, but in a dialect of English. Looks like English, but who can really understand it unless you've had, special language training? It's best to come with those results to a patent attorney and say, look, I think these things knock me out, but I'm not 100% sure. Or alternatively, you might have something which you say, well, mine's to what I'm doing is totally different. And then the patent attorney will look at it and say, well, actually, no, fundamentally, you no longer have a patent there that is available to you because of what these guys describe. So it's always a good idea, but as Avraham said, definitely do your own searching before shelling out money. Simply just be aware of what you have in your hand and what you don't.
Well, one thing I would actually add to that is I agree, doing your own searches is always a good start. Note down your search terms so that when you go to the patent professionals and you say, okay, I searched the following terms and this is what I came up with, we can also then take that exact same search, redo it, and see if there and see what we see as well. Because just like what Jeremy said, what we see with our eyes may be slightly different than what you see with yours. So that would also be a very helpful way to go about it.
Jeremy, if I may just add another quick note about the searching, is that there are some countries like the US which are very strict about you disclosing all prior art of which you are aware. So if the startup, the inventor, does do a search, they have to make sure they give to their patent attorney an accurate list of the patents they found in that search so that you can comply with that duty to disclose to the US and to certain other countries.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Mike, I see your mic is still warm. So this last question from Mitch, not the first time that you've asked this question, but I think it's always good to refresh about algorithms. I really think it's within the framework of US law. Algorithms have been mentioned. This view towards patenting an algorithm. Mike.
So I see that Evyatar is also here, so that if Evyatar, if I say something that doesn't chime in with your experience, throw something at me.
No
problem. The thing about algorithms or any other sort of computer implemented invention, software, anything like that, is it also comes into this idea of subject matter eligibility, which I mentioned during my slides. And things which are considered to be just abstract and completely divorced from a physical reality or a physical object, you're not going to generally be able to obtain a patent claim on. Still in the US, and that's even with some of the updates to the eligibility standard, that's still the case. What we're looking for when we're looking at any sort of an algorithm or any sort of a software-based invention is, in a sort of a creepy way, can that algorithm or software reach out through the screen and do something in the real world? Can it manipulate something in the real world? Can it move something in the real world? And if it doesn't, then within the four corners of the computer, what is it doing, and is what it's doing truly making an improvement that is to the functioning or to the running of the computer that you couldn't have had without that newly developed algorithm? Those are the types of issues which the USPTO at this point is dealing with and thinking about when they're evaluating whether an algorithm or software is patentable or not.
Okay, well, if it's, may I just expand the question of job?
Please.
Okay, if it's, let's say, a physical system, in other words, it's not inside a box of the computer, but the algorithm is a basic part of running the system and making it more accurate, faster, cheaper, whatever. And the patent is requested for the totality of the physical whatever, plus the patent, plus the algorithm. Does that make a difference?
Yeah, it does. If the idea and the buzzword which the USPTO uses is integrated. If your algorithm is integrated into something which, in a way breathes life into that thing by virtue of the running of the algorithm, then that's going to put you in a pretty good position. The thing which is important, though, is then, of course, there's what you're actually doing and then what you can claim. And that combination, that integration between just the bare algorithm and the physical object, I think that and Evyatar can correct me here, I believe that type of integration between those two, abstract and physical aspects of the invention are necessary in order to get the claim past an examiner.
Yeah, I mean, there's a software, there's a sort of a realm of software called embedded software, which I think means that it's actually in the system itself. It's not something, external, but it's built in and burned into the chip, for example.
Right, but I think that it would be, if it's something like that which is built in and burned into the chip, it would be, you would be claiming a chip that comprises that software. And yes, the chip may be something which is generic, and the patentable aspect, the new and non-obvious aspect of your claim is the software. But it's very clear that those two things are it's a single entity. It's one and the same.
So that makes it patentable. In other words, for example, to give you an example, somebody came out with glasses for people who don't see well or even are blind, and their glasses can read signs and can say there's a car in front of you. Now, the artificial intelligence and the algorithm within the glasses, of course, is the major part of this, right? And it's really the guts of this thing. The fact that it looks like glasses is really no importance. But if you just wanted to do the algorithm, you probably couldn't do it.
Correct. That's my gut feeling would be, absolutely, that's the way it would. The thing that we would do is, of course, is try to be as broad as possible in the way that we claim that physical aspect to the invention, and create as broad a category as possible, in which that algorithm is embedded into or stuck into, but still it would need to be present.
Okay, thank you, Mitch, first of all, for your question. Thank you, Mike. EvoluTTiOn, do you want to add anything, or was it pretty much covered?
That was pretty much on point. I will say that in a case where you mentioned the chip with embedded data, that's sometimes more of a case-by-case situation, because then you have to see what exactly is embedded, how it's embedded, and what's it doing. It's not always clear-cut, at least not with the USPTO, when you're looking at the patentability of, or the subject matter of it. Right. Otherwise, yeah, Mike was correct.
Okay, thank you. The last thing, okay, Son, you have a question here about budget. Okay, this is always going to be very specific to exactly what you want to do, when you want to do it, and process. I mean, even just taking a simple example of a general sort of model how the money would be spent. That's obviously going to be in lockstep with the process. The process may be an initial provisional. You then may file a PCT, an international application, 12 months later. At the same time, you may or may not file a US utility and a Chinese application. And a year and a half later, you may then file a number of other applications. You also may have a number of connected inventions, which you may put in one application, which may then be divided. So as you can already see, it's a complex question. I'd be certainly happy to discuss that with you. We could do it a little bit later or tomorrow, something like that. Again, there is no one answer that would be at all meaningful. Anyway, I hope that's okay for the moment. Again, we can talk about it. So anyway, thank you very much. I do apologize for the fact that we have gone over time. I hope that it was worth your while. I always learn a lot from these things, even, though theoretically I know everything, but I don't. No one knows everything. It's always good to chat, apart from anything else. And for anyone that decides to come back in 2 weeks' time, the point of view will be very different. And I would hope that anyone that does come back would say, well, 1 minute, Jeremy said we were talking about the same things as we did 2 weeks ago, but I don't hear that. Well, in that case, we will have succeeded. Anyway, again, thank you very much. Thank you for the people that have thanked us. And we look forward to seeing you, whether it's in 2 weeks' time or whenever it is. And stay safe.
Good day, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Bye.